is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
From a young age, Mark Reed was known by the nickname Chopper, after a character from the Yankee Doodle cartoon series. Chopper's childhood was a tough one. He grew up in Melbourne, Australia in the 50s and 60s, dealing with regular beatings from his father and the childhood trauma of molestation. By 14 years old, he was removed from his parents' care and became a ward of the court. His behavioral and mental issues meant that Chopper spent his late teens moving from one inpatient psychiatric facility to another. According to Chopper, mental health professionals declared him as mentally insane 3 times throughout his life. That first time was at the age of 15. To try to treat his insanity, Chopper was forced to undergo electroshock therapy. Allegedly, he went through shock treatments 60 times during a 6-month time period. Even as a teenager, Chopper had a reputation as a street fighter that you didn't want to mess with. He quickly became the leader of a notorious Surrey road gang, cementing his role in the criminal underworld of Australia. At first, his crimes were limited to street brawls and taking money from drug dealers, but soon it wasn't enough for Chopper. Before long, he was regularly kidnapping other criminals, torturing them until they agreed to give him large sums of money. When they initially refused to hand over the cash, he would remove their toes using bolt cutters or burn them with a blowtorch. Chopper was a hardened criminal, but he was never sneaky about it. He was caught by the police on countless occasions, facing charges of assault, kidnapping, armed robbery, arson, and impersonating a police officer. It meant that from his early 20s to his late 30s, he only spent 13 months as a free man. In the late 1970s, Chopper was incarcerated in Pentridge Prison, where he decided to start a prison war. His gang, the Overcoat Gang, concealed their smuggled weapons inside winter coats, which they wore even in the heat of the Australian summer. During his time in Pentridge, Chopper was staying in the prison's maximum security unit, called the H Division, which the inmates nicknamed the Hell Division. He was willing to do anything to get out of H Division, and eventually he came up with a plan. He persuaded another maximum security prisoner to hold him down and cut both of his ears off, correctly predicting that the wounds would allow him to spend some time elsewhere. Later, he claimed that he did it to win a bet. Even Chopper's fellow inmate criminals felt like he was going too far in his efforts to win the gang war. So eventually, his own gang plotted against him. Possibly some of his fellow Overcoat gang members had heard about a pricey contract for anybody who managed to take Chopper down, and they wanted that money. The group ambushed and stabbed Chopper, and even though he lost multiple feet of his intestines due to the wounds, he survived. In a surprising move, Chopper dipped his toes into the literary world and published his first book in 1991. It was called Chopper from the Inside, and it contained a collection of letters he'd written during his time in Pentridge, where he talked about his crimes and the ups and downs of life in prison. He went on to publish a complete series of biographical books and eventually branched out into writing fictional novels, which he based on his own experiences as a prisoner and criminal. In 1992, Chopper was charged with shooting another man in the chest in the back of his car. The victim, Sidney Michael Edward Collins, had survived the attack and told the authorities that the perpetrator was Mark Chopper Reed. Chopper pled not guilty, but his charges were downgraded from attempted murder to simply committing an unlawful act intended to cause bodily harm. For shooting a man in the chest, it was a relatively light consequence. However, the courts recognized that he was a danger to society. They decided to sentence him to indefinite detention and declared him as a dangerous criminal, somebody who they felt should never be outside of a prison cell again. The conviction was appealed twice. Both times it was rejected. During his time imprisoned in Tasmania for shooting Sydney in the chest, Mark met and married Mary Ann Hodge, who worked for the Australian Taxation Office. Finally, in 1997, 3 years after the last failed appeal, Chopper's lawyer was able to get the declaration overturned. In 1998, Chopper was approved for parole. Against the odds, he was a free man. Shortly after his release, he appeared on live television and gave a horrified audience a detailed description of what it looked like to kill a man by putting him into a cement mixer. And this didn't stop him from later being invited to act in an advertisement for the Pedestrian Council of Australia as a part of an anti-drunk driving campaign. Since his release from prison, Chopper lived with his wife, Mary Ann, in Tasmania. She gave birth to a son, a boy named Charlie, who Chopper credited with changing his life. Quote, "I became a human being at 45 when I saw my first boy born," he later said in an interview. In 2002, Chopper was a family man, but he became a person of interest in a crime once again. He was suspected to be involved in the disappearance of Sydney Collins, whose body was never found. However, there was never enough evidence to tie Chopper to the case, so he remained free. Chopper had always loved a performance. He had a constant desire for storytelling. It started with bragging to fellow inmates and progressed to publishing his stories for the world to see. And in 2005, he went on tour across Australia to perform. He'd created a series of shows, which he jokingly titled, "I'm Innocent." Chopper had become close friends with comedian Doug Chappell, who later joined him in his performances. In return, Chopper was often invited into Doug Chappell's comedy show as a guest. Chopper's artistic talents, and I'm using air quotes on talents, weren't limited to writing comedy and performances. He decided to branch out by releasing a rap album in 2008. He called it Interview with a Madman. The album featured raps and skits about his own life with titles such as Night with Chopper, Cutting Off Me Ears, and Razors in the Soap. Despite his fame and the constant publicity he received, Chopper eventually declared bankruptcy in 2007. He owed around $80,000 in credit card debt, and he had loaned a total of $140,000 in cash to 12 different people. Chopper was never far from the news headlines, and on the 15th of December 2008, he once again made the front page. But this time, he wasn't the perpetrator of the crime. While in Collingwood, Victoria, Chopper had allegedly been attacked by a complete stranger who was holding a tomahawk. The assailant managed to hit Chopper with the tomahawk's blunt end, entering his arm. But Chopper's time as a gang member had left him eternally prepared for a fight. According to Chopper, he grabbed a nearby pipe and invited the tomahawk-wielding man to attack him again. The man supposedly lost his nerve and ran away. Nobody matching the description of Chopper's supposed attacker has ever been arrested for the incident. It was around this time when Chopper's health was declining. During the decades he spent in prison, he'd caught the hepatitis C virus, which had severely damaged his liver. In March 2008, he made a public announcement. He needed a liver transplant, or he'd die within the next 5 years. He knew that transplant would save his life, but he refused to undergo the procedure, believing that the transplanted organ should go to another patient in need. 4 years later, Chopper was still alive, but he was diagnosed with liver cancer. And in 2013, he passed away in a hospital at the age of 58. Very shortly before his death, Chopper had featured on the Australian 60 Minutes show. He confessed to his involvement in the disappearance of Sydney Collins a decade earlier, saying that he'd shot Sydney with his own gun. However, he didn't feel bad for killing Sydney. In fact, he said the man was stupid because he hadn't prevented Chopper from taking his weapon and killing him. In the same interview, he credited himself for numerous other killings, including the supposed suicide of a child sex offender in 1974 and several shootings throughout the 70s and 80s. The number of murders he took ownership of varied, but throughout the years, he implicated himself in 19 murders and 11 attempted murders. In a 2013 New York Times interview, Chopper had been asked to look back on his life of crime. Quote, "Look, Honestly, he said to the interviewer, I haven't killed that many people. Probably about 4 or 7, depending on how you look at it. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, the host, and thank you so much for listening. If you are new to 10-Minute Murder, welcome. Happy spooky month to you. Settle in and binge the episodes. There are 300 plus episodes for you to go back and listen to if you want to. But before you do that, make sure you hit the subscribe button wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can more easily catch up on all the back episodes. Find the show easier. Also, connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media and see the pictures of what we talk about here on the podcast. It's also videos. Like the story today, Mark Chopper Reed. I'll probably post links to some of the videos to see some of the interviews and things like that he gave throughout the years. It's never gross and graphic stuff that you're going to find on the 10-Minute Murder Facebook, Instagram pages. Just stuff to let you put faces to the names that you hear me talking about. And this part's important. If you enjoy this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, any place that's possible. Audible, you can do it there too. Your positive feedback is very much appreciated and helps this show grow. And speaking of helping this show grow, share the podcast with your friends and family, anyone that you think could be into brief true crime stories like the one you heard today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.